The words attitude problem sat there on my performance review like an accusation without evidence. I stared at them on my laptop screen Friday afternoon, reading the same paragraph for the third time. Catherine demonstrates technical competence but struggles with team collaboration. Her resistance to feedback and defensive communication style create friction. Multiple colleagues have expressed concerns about her attitude. I closed my laptop carefully, aware that my manager Bryce was watching me from across his desk, waiting for a reaction. "Do you have questions about the review?" he asked. "Yes," I said, keeping my voice level. "Can you provide specific examples of when I resisted feedback or communicated defensively?" His jaw tightened slightly. "It's more about the overall pattern. Multiple team members have mentioned it. Which team members? What did they say specifically? That's confidential. So I'm being put on a performance improvement plan for vague complaints you can't substantiate with concrete examples? See, this is exactly what I'm talking about." Bryce leaned back in his chair. "You're being defensive right now. You immediately go on the attack instead of accepting feedback." I took a slow breath, feeling the familiar frustration building. "I'm asking for specifics because I can't improve on attitude without understanding what behaviors need to change." "That's not being defensive. That's asking for clarity. The fact that you can't see the problem is part of the problem, Kat." I'd been at North Star Systems for 3 years. 3 years of consistently exceeding my sales targets. 3 years of landing major accounts while other reps struggled. 3 years of being the person clients specifically requested to work with because I was thorough, responsive, and honest about what our software could and couldn't do. And now, apparently, I had an attitude problem. "I'd like to take the weekend to review this and provide a written response," I said. "That's fine, but the PIP starts Monday regardless. You'll have 60 days to show improvement in your interpersonal dynamics." I walked out of Bryce's office at 4:47 p.m. on a Friday, gathered my things and left the building without speaking to anyone. In and out. My car, I sat for a moment, hands on the steering wheel, processing what had just happened. Then I did something I'd been quietly doing for the past 6 months. I opened the voice memo app on my phone, selected new recording and summarized the conversation while it was fresh. Friday, November 17th, 4:30 p.m., performance review meeting. Bryce cited attitude problem and resistance to feedback without providing specific examples. When I asked for details to understand what needed improvement, he characterized my questions as being defensive and proving his point. No concrete incidents cited. No documentation provided. PIP to start Monday. I'd started recording these summaries back in May, after the second time Bryce had accused me of being combative during a team meeting where I'd simply pointed out an error in his sales forecast. I wasn't recording the actual conversations, just my contemporaneous recollections immediately afterward. Perfectly legal. And increasingly necessary. Before I tell you what happened next, I need you to understand something. This story isn't about a difficult employee learning to play nice. It's about what happens when bad attitude becomes code for something else entirely. When asking questions becomes insubordination. When competence becomes threatening. And when documentation becomes your only defense against a narrative being built around you. If you've ever been labeled difficult, aggressive, or problematic for doing the same things your colleagues do without consequence, stay with me. Because what my manager didn't know was that I'd been carefully tracking every single one of these incidents. And Monday morning was about to get very interesting. My name is Catherine Chen, though everyone calls me Kat. I'm 32 years old, a senior account executive at North Star Systems, and until this performance review, I'd been one of their top performers. Consistent President's Club winner. Client satisfaction ratings in the 95th percentile. Revenue generation 23% above quota for 3 consecutive years. I'm direct by nature. I ask questions when things don't make sense. I push back on ideas that won't work. And apparently, somewhere along the line, that became a liability instead of an asset. I grew up as the daughter of immigrants who built a successful restaurant through brutal work ethic and refusing to accept mediocrity. My parents taught me that excellence spoke for itself, that if you worked harder and delivered better results than everyone else, you'd be recognized and rewarded. They were wrong about that last part. The problems had started about 8 months ago when Bryce was promoted to sales manager. He was 36, ambitious, and determined to make his mark. His first initiative was implementing a new sales methodology he'd learned at some expensive leadership conference. In our first team meeting under his management, he presented the approach with great enthusiasm. When he finished, I raised my hand. This methodology assumes long sales cycles with multiple stakeholders, I said. Most of our deals close in 30 to 45 days with 1 or 2 decision makers. How do we adapt this for our actual sales environment? The room went quiet. Bryce's smile tightened. The methodology works across all sales environments. That's why major companies use it. I'm sure it does work in some environments. I'm asking specifically how we modify it for ours, since our cycle time and stakeholder counts are different from the use cases you presented. Maybe if you approach this with an open mind instead of immediately finding problems, you'd see the value. I felt heat rise in my face, but I kept my voice steady. I'm not finding problems. I'm asking implementation questions. That's different. Let's take this offline, Bryce said, moving quickly to the next agenda item. After the meeting, he'd pulled me aside. You undermined me in front of the entire team. I asked a clarifying question about how to implement your idea. You made it seem like the methodology was flawed. I asked how to adapt it to our specific situation. If that's not allowed, then I don't understand how we're supposed to implement anything effectively. That was the first time he'd used the word defensive. Over the following months, a pattern emerged. In meetings where male colleagues asked challenging questions, Bryce engaged with the substance. When I asked similar questions, I was being negative, resistant, or difficult. When Marcus from Enterprise Sales pushed back on a forecast projection, it was good critical thinking. When I did the same thing, it was creating unnecessary conflict. When Tyler questioned a new commission structure, Bryce thanked him for raising concerns. When I expressed the exact same concerns in the next breath, I was complaining and not being a team player. I started documenting everything. Not just my interactions with Bryce, but the different treatment I observed. Same behaviors, different responses, consistent pattern based on who was doing the behavior. I'd also started documenting something else. Small comments that seemed innocuous individually but formed a pattern collectively. You're very aggressive for someone your size. That was after I'd closed our largest deal of the quarter. Maybe tone it down in client meetings. You come across as pushy. That was regarding a meeting where the client had specifically praised my responsiveness. The clients don't need you to be their therapist. Just sell the product. That was after I'd spent time understanding a client's actual needs before proposing a solution. And then there were the comments that weren't even disguised. You're lucky, you're good at your job because your personality doesn't make it easy to like you. I'd recorded summaries of all of it. Dates, times, contexts, exact quotes when I could remember them. Close paraphrases when I couldn't. That Friday night after the performance review, I sat at my kitchen table and pulled up everything I documented over 6 months. 32 separate incidents. Patterns of disparate treatment. Patterns of comments that seemed to focus on my communication style, my demeanor, my personality, rather than my actual work performance. And here's what I noticed when I looked at it all together. The criticism intensified after 3 specific events. First, after I'd landed the Meridian account, our largest client acquisition in 2 years. Bryce had presented it to senior leadership as a team win driven by his strategy, mentioning me only briefly despite the fact that I'd managed every aspect of the 9-month sales cycle. Second, after I'd politely declined Bryce's invitation to get drinks after work to discuss my career development, I'd explained I had dinner plans with my girlfriend, Alex. His demeanor toward me shifted noticeably after that. Third, after the senior VP of sales, Janet Rodriguez, had pulled me aside at the annual sales kickoff to tell me she was impressed with my work and wanted to discuss potential leadership opportunities. After each of these events, the attitude problem narrative had escalated. I spent Saturday organizing my documentation into a clear timeline. I spent Sunday researching company policies on performance reviews, discrimination, and retaliation. And Monday morning, I got to the office at 7:30 a.m., an hour before Bryce typically arrived. I sat at my desk and waited. At 8:15 a.m., my desk phone rang. Internal extension, but not one I recognized. Catherine Chen, I answered. Kat, this is Janet Rodriguez. Do you have a moment to come up to my office? Janet Rodriguez, Senior VP of Sales, Bryce's boss's boss, of course. I'll be right up. I gathered my laptop and took the elevator to the executive floor. Janet's assistant waved me directly in. Janet stood as I entered, along with two other people I recognized, Monica Walsh from HR and Thomas Kim from legal. My stomach dropped. This was either very good or very bad. Kat, please sit, Janet said. I want to be direct with you. We received an anonymous complaint on Friday afternoon that requires investigation. The complaint alleges that Bryce has been creating a hostile work environment for you and potentially other employees. I stayed quiet, letting her continue. The complaint included specific allegations of discriminatory treatment based on gender and national origin, as well as potential retaliation. Given the seriousness, we need to conduct a formal investigation. I want to hear your perspective. Before I respond, I said carefully, I'd like to understand something. Who filed the anonymous complaint? Janet exchanged glances with Monica. We can't disclose that. I understand. I'm asking because I haven't filed a complaint. So someone else saw something concerning enough to report it independently. The three of them were quiet for a moment. That's correct, Monica finally said. In that case, yes, I'd like to share my perspective. And I have documentation. I spent the next 90 minutes walking them through everything. The disparate treatment in meetings. The pattern of characterizing my questions as attitude problems. The timeline of when criticism intensified. The comments about my communication style and personality. The performance review that cited vague complaints without specifics. I pulled up my voice memo summaries, explaining that I'd started recording contemporaneous notes of incidents because I was confused by the negative feedback that didn't align with my performance metrics. Thomas from legal took extensive notes. Monica's expression grew increasingly concerned. Janet's face was carefully neutral, but I could see the calculation happening behind her eyes. When I finished, Janet asked, "Why didn't you come to HR or senior leadership earlier?" Because I second-guessed myself constantly. Each individual incident seemed small enough that reporting it would make me look like I couldn't handle normal feedback. It was only when I documented everything together that the pattern became clear. And I was afraid that complaining would be used as more evidence of my bad attitude. That's exactly the problem, Monica said quietly. Janet stood up. Kat, here's what's going to happen. You're going to take the rest of today and tomorrow as paid administrative leave while we investigate. This is not punitive toward you. We need to interview other team members without you present. The PIP that Bryce initiated on Friday is suspended pending investigation outcome. Understood. One more question, Thomas said. The person who filed the file. Anonymous complaint specifically mentioned observing disparate treatment in team meetings. They provided examples that closely match what you've described. Would you have any idea who might have noticed these patterns? I thought about our team. 8 account executives. Marcus had been there longest. Tyler was newest. Christina and James were mid-tenure like me. Then there was Priya, who'd started 6 months ago. Priya. Sharp, quiet Priya who sat across from me in team meetings and rarely spoke up, but always seemed to be paying attention. I might have an idea, I said. But I'd rather not speculate. After I left Janet's office, I took the elevator back down, gathered my laptop and personal items, and drove home. It was 10:30. I'm on a Monday and I just spent 90 minutes with senior leadership, HR, and legal. I called Alex from my car. "How's work?" she asked. "I'm coming home, and I need to tell you about something that's been happening." When I got home, I told her everything. About the performance review, the documentation I'd been keeping, the meeting this morning, the investigation. Things I'd been carrying alone because I didn't want to seem paranoid or overly sensitive. "Kat," Alex said when I finished, "why didn't you tell me this was happening?" "Because I kept thinking maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was being difficult. Maybe my attitude was actually a problem, and I just couldn't see it." "That's what they wanted you to think. That's how this works." She was right, of course. The gaslighting had been so gradual, so consistent, that I'd internalized it, started questioning my own perceptions and responses. Tuesday was strange. I stayed home, worked on personal projects, tried not to obsessively check my work email. Around 3 p.m., I got a call from Monica in HR. "Kat, we've completed initial interviews with your team members. Without getting into details, your account is corroborated by multiple witnesses. We're extending our investigation to examine Bryce's management of the entire team. We need a few more days. Plan to return to work on Monday of next week." Can I ask what happens with my performance review? That's, well, part of what we're determining. But I can tell you that a PIP based on undocumented vague accusations wouldn't stand up to scrutiny, even without the other concerns. After we hung up, I felt something I hadn't felt in months. Not quite relief. More like space to breathe. Wednesday, Alex convinced me to take an actual day off. We drove to the coast, walked on the beach, had lunch at a seafood place with an ocean view. I turned off my phone for 6 hours. Thursday morning, I woke up to 3 missed calls from Janet Rodriguez. I called back immediately. "Kat, I need you to come in this afternoon for a meeting." I called back immediately. "Kat, I need you." 2 p.m., same conference room. This will be a resolution discussion. Should I bring anything? Just yourself. When I arrived that afternoon, the same 3 people were present: Janet, Monica, and Thomas. But this time, there was someone else. Richard Brooks, our CEO. That's when I knew this was serious. "Kat," Richard said, "thank you for coming in. I've been briefed on the investigation findings. What I'm about to share is preliminary, as we're still gathering information, but I wanted you to hear directly from me." He slid a document across the table. "Bryce has been placed on administrative leave, pending completion of our investigation. We've identified multiple policy violations in his management practices, including failure to provide documented feedback before initiating a PIP, disparate treatment of employees, and inappropriate comments that potentially violate our harassment and discrimination policies." I nodded slowly, processing. "More significantly," Richard continued, "we interviewed your team members. 6 of 8 reported observing the treatment you described. 3 others, all women, reported similar experiences with Bryce. Priya shared that she almost quit last month because of comments Bryce made about her accent and communication style." My chest tightened. Priya had been suffering too, and I hadn't known. "Your performance review has been formally rescinded," Monica said. "It will be removed from your file entirely. We're also conducting a comprehensive review of all performance reviews and PIPs Bryce has issued to ensure there aren't other problematic patterns." "What happens now?" I asked. "That depends partly on what you want," Janet said. "The company has several options we're considering regarding Bryce's employment. But more immediately, we need to address your situation. You obviously can't report to Bryce anymore." "I'd prefer not to," I said dryly. "We're restructuring the team reporting lines," Richard explained. "You and 3 others will report directly to Janet. Bryce's role is being re-evaluated. But here's what I want you to know, Kat. I've reviewed your performance data. Your results speak for themselves. The fact that those results were being overshadowed by manufactured complaints about your attitude represents a failure of management and a failure of our systems to catch it earlier." He leaned forward. "I also want to apologize. You should have felt safe coming to leadership with this earlier. The fact that you didn't tells me we have cultural work to do." "I appreciate that," I said, "but I need to be honest. I'm not sure I can trust that this won't happen again with a different manager." How do I know the next person won't do the same thing and be better at hiding it? That's a fair question, Monica said. We're implementing new protocols. Mandatory documentation requirements before any PIP. Regular skip-level meetings between team members and senior leadership. Anonymous feedback channels that come directly to HR and legal, not through managers. And comprehensive management training on bias and equitable treatment. Those are good steps, I said, but I need something else. They waited. I need everyone to know what happened. Not the details, but the outcome. Because if this is quietly swept away, the message to other managers is that they can do this with minimal consequences. And the message to other employees is that reporting problems won't actually change anything. Richard nodded slowly. What are you proposing? A company-wide communication acknowledging that a management issue was identified and addressed. That an employee came forward with concerns that were validated. That changes are being implemented. Make it clear that speaking up is protected and taken seriously. Done, Richard said without hesitation. Friday afternoon, an email went out to the entire company. It was carefully worded, legally reviewed, and didn't name names. But it acknowledged that a management situation had been identified through the anonymous reporting system, investigated, and addressed. It outlined new policies being implemented. And it emphasized the company's commitment to equitable treatment and accountability at all levels. Monday morning, I returned to work. The dynamics had shifted noticeably. Several team members stopped by my desk privately. Marcus first. I should have said something earlier. I saw what was happening and I didn't speak up. I'm sorry. You're not responsible for his behavior, I told him. No, but I'm responsible for mine. Staying quiet is a choice too. Then, Christina. Bryce told me once that you were hard to work with. I believed him without questioning. I should have formed my own opinion. Priya came last, closing my office door behind her. You know I filed that complaint, don't you? I suspected. I almost didn't. I was terrified. But I kept thinking about how he talked to you in meetings, and how nobody said anything, and how if someone like you who's been here 3 years and crushes quota couldn't push back safely, what chance did I have? She paused. Thank you for documenting everything. Your records backed up my complaint and made them take it seriously. Thank you for being brave enough to file it. I was drowning and didn't realize someone else saw it happening. Over the following weeks, more details emerged. Bryce had been putting pressure on multiple employees, but his treatment of women on the team was measurably harsher. His performance reviews of male employees averaged 4.2 out of 5. His reviews of women averaged 3.1 despite comparable or better performance metrics. He was ultimately terminated. Not just for how he treated me, but for a pattern of discriminatory management practices that exposed the company to significant legal liability. 2 months later, Janet called me into her office. We're creating a new role, she said. Senior account, executive, strategic accounts with team-led responsibilities. 15% salary increase, commission structure adjustment, and direct report of 5 AEs. I'd like you to take it. A management position, leadership, not traditional management. You'd still carry accounts, but you'd also mentor and develop newer reps. Help them navigate difficult situations. Be the kind of leader you need. I thought about it for approximately 3 seconds. Yes. 6 months after the investigation, I was leading a team of 5 account executives, including Priya. In our first team meeting, I established ground rules. In this team, questions are welcome. Pushback is not only accepted but encouraged if you have a legitimate concern. We debate ideas, not people. And if anyone ever makes you feel like your communication style or personality is a problem without concrete behavioral examples, you come directly to me. One of my team members, a young rep named David, raised his hand. What? If we're actually being difficult, though, then I'll tell you specifically what behavior needs to change and why it's problematic. You'll never get vague accusations about attitude. You'll get clear feedback on actions and impact. That's the difference between legitimate management and manufactured problems. A year after everything happened, I was invited to speak at our company's annual sales meeting. Janet had asked me to share my story as part of a session on workplace culture and speaking up. Standing at that podium, looking at 200 sales professionals, I told a version of what had happened. Not to shame Bryce or celebrate his firing, but to illustrate how easily attitude problem becomes a weapon against people who ask questions, push back, or simply don't fit someone's preferred communication style. The most insidious thing about being labeled difficult, I said, is that it makes you doubt your own perceptions. Each individual incident seems small enough to ignore, but patterns matter, documentation matters. And sometimes the most important thing you can do is trust yourself when something feels wrong. After my talk, a line formed. People wanting to share their own stories. Managers wanting advice on avoiding the mistakes Bryce made. IT professionals asking about the documentation practices that had validated my experience. One young woman, maybe 25, approached near the end. I'm being told I have an attitude problem. No specifics, just vague accusations that I'm not collaborative. But I'm Noi, he, the top performer on my team. What should I do? I gave her my number. Start documenting everything. Dates, times, what was said, who was present, how similar situations involving others were handled differently. And if it continues, you will come to me. We've built a reporting structure now where this should get addressed. But you need to be your own advocate first. If you've stayed with me through this entire story, thank you. I know it's not the explosive revenge narrative some stories promise. But what happened was actually more important than dramatic confrontation. The truth is, someone tried to destroy my credibility and career by labeling me difficult when I was simply competent and unwilling to be quiet. They counted on me doubting myself, staying silent, and eventually leaving. They forgot that documentation defeats gaslighting. That patterns become undeniable when you track them. And that sometimes the person watching everything from across the table might be brave enough to speak up when you can't. If you've ever been called difficult, aggressive, or problematic for doing things others do without consequence, I want you to know something. Your reality is valid. Your perceptions matter. And the documentation you're keeping, thinking maybe you're paranoid, might be the evidence that saves not just your career, but someone else's too. If this story resonated with you, please like and subscribe. Share your experiences in the comments, especially if you've been labeled difficult, for behaviors that are praised in others. Your stories create the pattern recognition that helps others identify what's happening to them. Remember, sometimes the most powerful thing you can do isn't immediate confrontation. It's careful documentation, strategic patience, and trusting that eventually, patterns become impossible to ignore.